The USD study Drug Violence in Mexico is a comprehensive look at crimes that range from kidnapping to extortion to homicide, with metrics on who committed those crimes and how things have changed over the last 2 decades. Here with the details is Professor David Shirk, director of the Justice in Mexico Project and one of the authors of the study. David, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Your report says in 2013 that there was a significant drop in homicides in Mexico overall, but not in Baja California, not Tijuana. How do those numbers compare?
Well, nationally we saw, according to government law enforcement data, which are still preliminary, about a 16% decline in homicides nationwide. In Baja, we saw a significant uptick from about 300 or so homicides last year to just under 500 homicides, in 2013.
Correct. And now, so that seems like a little bit of a discrepancy, but you have an answer for that. What do you think is the cause of that?
Well, there's a couple of things going on. One is overall violence has been a lot lower in Tijuana than at the peak in 2008 and 2009. So it's really a fraction of the violence we saw then, when you had close to 2,000 homicides in Tijuana annually. So this is actually not it reflects the fact that violence overall nationwide has come down so much so that Tijuana actually stands out now, despite relatively lower levels of violence there.
I see. So it's sort of a comparison. You also looked at homicide rates in all of the Americas. Where does Mexico stand in comparison to, say, other countries like the U.S. or Canada? You
know, as much as we hear about violence in Mexico, Peggy, the reality is that violence in Mexico is homicides in Mexico are about average for the region of Latin America and the Americas as a whole. We're looking at a rate of somewhere between 20 and 25 per 100,000, which is a lot less than Honduras, which has 90 homicides per 100,000.
And I believe Canada has the least amount, correct?
Canada is the safest place you can be.
Okay, I'm sure they'll like that. I also know this study mapped, among other things, the locations of murders and missing persons in Mexico related to drug cartels. How many of those crimes were actually attributed to drug trafficking or organized crime groups?
You know, about half of the roughly 18,000 homicides tracked by Mexican law enforcement last year were attributable to organized crime groups of some form. So that it really shows that the problem of drug trafficking and organized crime in Mexico account for a lot of the violence. So if you can solve that problem, you can really bring down Mexico's homicide rate a great deal.
And so now the homicide rate is dropping. What do you think is the reason behind that?
Well, for one thing, the cartels have begun to reduce competition. We've seen reduced competition between cartels, in part because in some places the cartels, a particular cartel has a monopoly. In other cases, we've seen the dismantling of certain organizations in ways that reduces competition. So if
would that be because of the presidential crackdown over the last few years?
In part, we've seen the dismantling of certain organizations quite substantially in the last 5 years or so, the Beltran-Leyva organization and others. So that helps to reduce competition, but it doesn't necessarily stop drug trafficking.
And we'll have to end on this one, but at the same time that murders are down overall, your study also found that statistically kidnappings and extortion and serious crimes were up. What's the link there?
Well, as you break up organized crime groups, it means that there are a lot of criminals who are now out of work at a local level, and they're looking for other kinds of entrepreneurial criminal activities, including kidnapping and extortion.
You have said to look at these murder rates with skepticism. How come?
Well, the figures that we reference in our report are law enforcement reports on cases opened on homicide. They're not the official coroner reports that we'll learn about later this year from the National Statistics Agency in Mexico. Some people have suggested that the Mexican government, the federal government, may be manipulating or undercounting the statistics.
And based on the 20 years of data of violent crime, what do you think the trend is for the next couple of years, the short term? Can you extrapolate?
I think in the next 5 years we'll continue to see a downward trend. The peak in violence in Mexico, as I said, was a war among organized crime groups. I think that war is winding down, and hopefully we'll see a continued gradual decline of violence in Mexico.
Okay, well, we have a lot more on our website and links to this report. Professor David Shirk, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Peggy.